Today's video is brought to you by good old Manscaped.com. Manscaped has more than 4 million men worldwide shaving their balls with the premium tools and formulations designed specifically by the greatest engineers regarding grooming and hygiene. Oh, and this time they're going past the groin with the Ultra Premium Collection. And yes, this is in fact an all-in-one skin and hair care kit that covers you from head to toe, literally. Now, Manscaped has a 5 steps in 5 minutes package all about showering, which, when you're posting on a gaming channel is a little sus. But they've got 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioners. They've got body wash with refined cologne scent, body spray, hydrating indeed, aluminum free stick deodorant, and moisturizing lip balm. Yes, indeed. So what are these steps? Step 1, hop into the shower and use that 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner. With ingredients like coconut water and green tea, don't consume this. It'll definitely keep you hydrated and moisturized. And then once you've got all out, your hair is rinsed, you can then apply the Manscaped body wash, which it gives you that premium, perfect balance of tough cleaning and soothing hydration. It actually feels good. Step 3, once you've rinsed and toweled off, you can apply the body spray, which gives you an extra bit of moisturization. Then you've got Manscaped deodorant, and y'all know who you are. Apply some of this stick-on beauty, and you'll actually be able to fight some of that dirty BO. You'll end up smelling pretty great. Then step 5, which is the lip balm, and I promise not to do that again if you use our code. And if you ever wondered, am I showering in a cruelty-free environment? Yes, you are, because it's cruelty-free, paraben-free, and vegan, which explains why I can't shut up about it. And if you pick a replenishment cycle that works for you using the Peak Hygiene Plan, ensuring that you won't run out of your favorite Manscaped products, then yes, please, thank you, go for that. Thank you, Manscaped, for covering me from head to toe. And make sure you go to manscaped.com and use our promo code SOG for 20% off your order plus free international shipping. Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and the last time we looked at Cyberpunk was in my video, The Downgrading of Cyberpunk 2077. Now let's get this out of the way, I do like Cyberpunk a lot, okay? Enough to put over 150 hours into it across the PC and PlayStation platforms. But let's be real here, Cyberpunk has had a pretty rough time going for it. Now I've been waiting for this game to release longer than I have been running my entire YouTube channel, or at least pretty much on parallel. Hell, that website you just saw I must have pinged about 1 billion times, alright? A little exaggeration there. I must have seen this original teaser 2 billion times, but then I also still to this day laugh when I read coming when it's ready. But then of course as we move on, the original launch actually happened, and of course they were a little deceptive. Now if you were on the PC version, you had a strong enough system, you could actually get away with a pretty decent looking game. In fact, to this day, Cyberpunk 2077 with every setting on high, full blast ray tracing and everything, is still probably one of the prettiest games I've ever personally played on the PC platform. But if you were on the PS4 and Xbox One platforms, the one platforms the game was actually advertised to, you didn't exactly have the best of times. If you had a Pro system or an Xbox One X, it was marginally better than actually having the base systems, which failed to really render and keep up with the game, alright? Whether it was crazy CPU logic or the fact that the game was absolutely pushing the GPU up to its maximum limits, and it's probably no doubt that CD Projekt Red didn't show what the game looked like on base systems before it launched for a, obvious reason. But hey, every game can change, and there were some patches put into place much through last year and all the way up to today. Now, Cyberpunk has been going through a fair amount of updates, it had a roadmap that it didn't match up to, and it wasn't until a couple days ago that patch 1.5. I mean, if you look at the actual launcher, just because they're advertising patch 1.5 like this, you'd think it's like a soft relaunch, but in reality, I want you to temper those expectations. Don't hype it up, it's a next-gen update, okay? That's pretty much what it is. Now, to realize that if you're a person from the PlayStation 4 generation, the PlayStation 4 Pro, or the last generation Xbox One lineup of families, this is not going to be the most exciting patch for you. It's probably going to fix a lot of things, don't get me wrong, but when it comes to new features, you're now sliced off, okay? Because going into the future, the target consoles, the target systems is going to be the PC, as it always really has been, the PlayStation 5, and the Xbox Series X, and the Xbox Series S, okay? That's pretty much what we're going to go on with. Now, they released patch 1.5, which, again, launched a few days ago, and they gave a cool little graphic that we can read. So, for instance, you want new weapons? Well, everybody in the lineup gets the new weapons, even Stadia. That's still alive. New apartments for V, which actually are surprisingly cool and we'll get to. That exists across every single platform. Hairdressing mirror, which allows you to customize your actual character. I know, basic RPG stuff exists across every single system. And this is a pretty basic feature, by the way. Like, most RPGs typically have a way for you to modify your player even after character creator, but here you can see that you can look into the mirror now, and once you look into the mirror, it's basically the same reflection, but you can actually, change the expression like before, but change appearance is totally new. Click on that, and you can actually modify your game in the same way that you would use the character creator at the very beginning. Again, congratulations that this is finally even a thing. Rebalance of gameplay, economy, and loot exists across every single system. Of course, these are things that you would expect, okay? Some new weapons, some new apartments, rebalancing of, a couple elements in the games. Nothing too big. Yeah, of course those are going to exist across everything. Where it starts to differ, though, are ray-traced local shadows. Now, ray tracing is probably one of the best aspects of Cyberpunk 2077 on the PC. If you've played Cyberpunk on the PC and you have a ray tracing card, you've probably seen night and day differences by enabling and disabling the features of ray tracing. It really can change the exact view of an entire image. It really can put extra oomph, life, and shine into Night City compared to other games out there. I would say with ray tracing, Cyberpunk 2077 is probably the best looking PC game that you can get on the market right now. So of course, for the consoles now, like the PS5 and the Xbox Series, you actually do have ray tracing capability. It's not as good as an RTX 3080, but then again, these are entire systems that cost less than a graphic card. And good luck getting a graphic card nowadays. Hey, good luck even getting a next generation system, but that's besides the point. The only bit of ray tracing that's been added are ray trace local shadows. Now don't get me wrong, I think any bit of ray tracing is super cool, but the shadows, I think, are actually added into the Xbox Series X and the PS5 version simply because they may be the less technically demanding ray tracing features compared to ray tracing reflections and ray tracing global illumination. Now in this case, the PS5 and specifically the Xbox Series X, not the S, have received ray tracing local shadows. Now in the game, this is considered to be performance mode or ray tracing mode. Performance mode runs the game up to 60 frames per second, and for the most part, it stays there. Again, a lot of things like NPC counts and various back-end rendering assets have been added into the game, higher textures, whatever you want to call it, higher settings in general, so you may see a dip in some cases. When ray tracing is enabled, basically all you get are local shadows. Now, I guess the best way to describe this is you're basically getting better ambient occlusion. Basically, the shadows are filling in locations where normal rasterization would typically not cover or fail. Effectively, what you're getting are the best sort of shadow placements in the game right now. So basically, if you're looking at foliage specifically, you'll actually start to see, grass shadows render accurately. Or if you're looking at shadows on various small items scattered throughout the scenes, they'll be rendering accurately in relation to location of lighting sources and just how better their diffusion will be in regarding to that distance of various lighting sources. Again, it's really something that you have to really pick apart and see. In some cases, it does change the scene. It does fill a lot of elements, but in a lot of cases, it is, in my opinion, a bit hard to tell really the difference between these ray trace shadows and what the game typically gives you. Again, the ray tracing in Cyberpunk really stands out when you enable every feature in unison, because all of them come together to really create a enhanced scene, if you will. When you don't have the entire suite, it really becomes into a question if it's truly worth it. Now again, your frame rate dips all the way down to 30 frames. And in a game where you're constantly shooting firearms and you're driving vehicles at breakneck speeds, I think, in my opinion, I would prefer the 60 frames far more than the 30 frames per second the game offers. If there was a way for me to get these ray tracing features at 60 frames, in games like you would see Spider-Man Miles Morales or just Spider-Man in general, or various other, modern day games, then maybe I would consider this to be somewhat worth it. But as of right now, I would personally play the game at 60 frames per second. I think the game is great at 60 frames. I don't think these ray tracing effects at 30 is absolutely worth hitting your frame rate down to half. But again, that's my personal opinion. And that's where I really stand on the whole ray tracing when it comes to the console front. Now, if you're on the PC, ray tracing is great, and actually the performance has gotten better. I think with the newest update, and don't quote me on this, but I think the newest update actually added in proper AMD FSR support, and I've enabled some of it. And you need these artificial upscaling assists just because, as you can see here, I'm getting 20 frames on a 3090. Of course, that's a super ultra wide, but without any form of assist, it's unplayable. So here with DLSS and ultra performance, I'm going to enable it, and as you can see, I'm getting 74 frames. Now what's happening is the game is rendering at a low resolution, but upscaling it through the AI chip on the actual GPU. So the game looks relatively clear. Again, you can probably find the cracks if you look far enough, but here I'm going to go back down, enable FSR at ultra performance, and you can start to see that the game looks visibly blurrier. And that's because this is not a hardware solution, this is a purely software solution that works across many games, and of course you can start to see some limitations. It's not as good as DLSS, but if you're an AMD gamer that is playing on a 3090, an AMD 6900 XT, or anything in that nature that can ray trace, but you want playable frame rates, you need to start playing this way. Because 71 frames per second is a whole fucking hell of a lot better than playing the game at 20 frames in any capacity. It's definitely an update to what we had before, and if you're a console player, especially a next generation one, you've got some element of ray tracing, and I think some is better than none, if we're going to be completely honest here. But I think with the way current generation systems are, this is the best type of ray tracing we'll be getting until like pro versions of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X come out. Because as of now, you're starting to see actual hardware limitations in regard to ray tracing. But I think we've said enough on the topic. I think if you want a better video for that, Digital Foundry's probably done a much more comprehensive view of how the ray tracing system works. But for now, if you are a ray tracing aficionado, still the best experience by far is the PC version of the game. If you're on the console, I'd still just recommend sticking to 60 frames. But yes, that's just ray tracing in general. Let's move on to something else. Another big improvement to the graphics mode, the ray tracing mode for the consoles, is if you know what SSR is, which are screen space reflections, last time we looked at them, Night City is actually baked in with all of these SSR reflections. In the ray tracing mode, the quality for them has actually been up simply because I think it's rendering more resolution for the SSR system to read. And so a lot of those like screen space reflections, which basically are the reflections in the ground, like in puddles for consoles, they're not ray traced, they give you the illusion of it. They're actually rendered at a higher resolution, so things become a bit more clear. Again, I doubt you'll really be looking at them that closely in general gameplay, so really, in my opinion, I just stick with the 60 frame mode, especially when you have these modern current generation systems at the moment. Then you also have improved crowd reactions and spatial headphone audio, which again was added to Xbox Series X and S just recently to PS5. Now these things are relatively cool. For instance, now when you fire a gun into the air, the NPCs all actually run away as they're supposed to. You know, instead of cowering in fear and then you look away for half a second and they just despawn. That's a big benefit. And then of course, if you're a PlayStation 5 user, you exclusively get DualSense controller features. Now here's where I really wanted to dive in. Is Cyberpunk fixed by adding all of this? Now don't get me wrong, there are a lot of problems in Cyberpunk 2077. For instance, if you're going to wonder that the storyline will change or it's going to get some No Man's Sky style improvement, I always hate that comparison. For instance, No Man's Sky is an incredibly modular game. It starts off with you basically being on a planet, going to a ship, jumping on, and exploring in any direction that you feel like. Of course, you can add things like story elements, trading elements, entire jobs, gameplay loops to a game where it is incredibly modular. Games like Minecraft, games like No Man's Sky are inherently different than games like Cyberpunk 2077, which are heavily story-focused with Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. Of course, when CD Projekt Red made the single player, it's not as if they can go back in and add new features, new things like new pathways to go down, new dialogue prompts, which would require them to get the voice actors, get them to redo the dialogue, and then also create different chains in how player decisions are handled. For instance, One of the first initial missions in the entire game, Act 1, during the Arasaka heist prep, you actually go into an all-foods location. This is the only point in the entire game where you actually have a whole lot of options, something that even resembles games like Deus Ex with giving players a bounty of choice. This is not replicated throughout the rest of the game. In order to make missions more like that one mission throughout the entire game, you would have to redo the entire structure of the story, you would have to redo these entire missions completely, and add extra features that were never there. So again, I don't think it's reasonable that you would ever expect the story to be changed. And that goes for the side quest content and the NCPD hustle content, where you're basically running around killing a set group of enemies in different parts of the place just to gain a few rewards as you're traversing through Night City. I don't think you're going to get those changes. It isn't until CD Projekt Red creates actual expansion content, story expansions, that you can actually start to see a lot of these complaints being properly addressed. I don't think you're ever going to get that until new content comes. When that new story content comes, we don't know yet. Maybe soon, maybe next year, maybe this year, who knows? But for now, the game is being rebalanced, restructured, and re-released for the current generation systems right now, and taking full advantage of their hardware. Again, that's the extent of what you can reasonably expect from a game that's already been completed and sold to the average person. Now, up until this point, the Cyberpunk 2077 we've been experiencing on the consoles has basically been the last generation Xbox One, respectively for the Series consoles, and the PS4 version running on the PS5. Obviously, they've been given a 60 frame per second update on those systems just to take advantage of the hardware, but now they've been finally updated to actually go further beyond the frame rate update to actually touching key points of the game by having more NPCs render on the screen and actually having new things. Now, beyond the actual weapons and attachments and the vehicle that you get to purchase, the actual real big thing in this are the apartments. So here we're going to get a little real estate-ish. Now, of course, in the world of Night City, you have 4 apartments to rent for a year. By all functionality, this is just buying the apartment, okay? Story-wise, you're just renting it because I'm not going to go into spoiler territory, but to start off with, at the very cheapest end, you have the Northside apartment, which costs you around 5,000 eddies in the game. Now, one thing cool about these apartments is they actually reflect the gang affiliation that they're located near. So when you buy the Northside apartment, it's in this real dingy motel, and it's got a real Maelstrom vibe to it, which is the gang that controls that specific sector. Now, again, functionally, every apartment, as far as I've been able to see, is the exact same. They come with a bed to sleep in, they come with a mirror to change your appearance in or to look at yourself, they come with a stash to store your cool stuff, and weapon display racks if you have iconic weapons that you have stashed away. Now, beyond the Northside apartment, you then can get the Japantown apartment, which is by Jig Jig Street. So again, this has a real Tiger Claw vibe to it, and this is where you start to see the actual, furnishings and the actual space in the apartments reflect the price you're paying for it. Then you can buy the Glen and Haywood, which in my opinion is the best apartment in the game, because not only its size is huge, but the view that you get, especially when you add ray tracing to it, is absolutely jaw-dropping. Just don't look too close to any of these views because it will definitely take you out of the immersion, but hey, what else is new? And then the final apartment you get is the Corpo Plaza, which might be the worst apartment for the price because not only is the view dog shit, but the actual spacing in the apartment is pretty crap. I was expecting something on the tier of the actual hotel you got to visit in the beginning of the game, in Act 1 towards the end of the Arasaka heist, but these are the apartments that you get. And listen, it's not that they add so much in terms of the overall gameplay experience. Yes, you get some new interactions and some buffs depending on which apartment you buy, but overall this is just meant, really in my opinion, for the role-playing aspect. And beyond this, the actual improvements start to get a little bit hazy. There's also an ability for you to go to Easy Estates and actually change the starting apartment's decor for about 10,000 eddies just in your initial apartment. So you can go to a website and you can change a couple of the furnishings around. Now again, this is an addition to what content that wasn't there to begin with. Apartments are brand new to Cyberpunk 2077. And while functionally they give you a few buffs depending on which apartment that you're in, it adds the extra role-playing component. And it's just one of the many features that I think people asked for in Cyberpunk's case. And I think it's great that they're doing this kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong, this is extra stuff for you to spend your in-game money on, and it's extra stuff to help you roleplay in a game that you put tens, maybe hundreds of hours into, and as you constantly progress, it is kind of weird how the only apartment you have from start to finish is in Watson, when frankly by the end of the game you have multiple supercars. Why not be able to buy a better, larger apartment in more expensive parts of Night City. I mean, come on now. Now, one of the updates to the game was in the driving model. Beyond just doing launches, the game actually has a bigger emphasis on just transmission, I noticed. For instance, in the game, you can obviously purchase, your regular economy cars, your sports, your muscles, your hypercars, your bikes, which you still can't do wheelies on for some reason. Hopefully that'll come in like patch 1.6, 1.7, whatever. But generally, the vehicles start to feel a bit different now. Now, for instance, one of my favorite cars in the game is a Quadra Type 66 Avenger, and based on my real-world experience, it's very close to a Mustang GT 5.0, definitely in the stick shift category, because I've definitely noticed, maybe it was just a PS5 DualSense, because you can feel the gear sort of like giving you some feedback as you're switching gears in the game. And one thing I have noticed is obviously the muscle car, you can feel a lot more power in the Avenger in it, and it's obviously a little bit more grippy, at least a little bit I've noticed in this game. Maybe it could be placebo, but I've definitely noticed a difference between driving the Type 66 and then revving the Caliburn, which is basically this game's version of a Bugatti Veyron. And there is a difference. And given that you have different cars in this game, and not a whole lot of them, but there are different vehicles, it's great that they've started to feel different. One of the things I did like about Cyberpunk 2077 was there is a fast travel mode, but because, navigation in the city is so much fun with these vehicles, I've never ever touched the fast travel system in my total time playing. And speaking of fast traveling, one other thing that I would really love to see is we're in the year 2077. Where the hell are the autopilot cars? I'm just putting that out there. We live in a day and age currently where cars do have the ability to relatively self-navigate. Beyond the driving model, there is some changes to the AI. For instance, I've noticed that they become a bit better at fighting you. It's not really that noticeable, like they'll take cover here and there, but they used to do that in the previous patches anyway, so not much room for difference there. The police system, while very much functionally is still the same, they don't chase you or do anything. You can actually see them chasing other gang members, so there is a semblance of world reality offered there. Sometimes in the middle of a firefight, the NCPD is not going to totally ignore somebody else shooting a gun. Sometimes they'll jump in to deliver some good old-fashioned justice. But for the most part, the law enforcement system is still very much missing from the core game. And I think it's still, it's obviously not good. Like, I'm not trying to make some GTA comparison. Really, any open world game, you can look at Watch Dogs, you can look at GTA, you can look at any game with just really most crime-based open world games, you're going to have some law enforcement system that I think everyone likes to test once in a while. In this game, you can do that, and yeah, they'll still just end up appearing randomly behind you. There is no dynamic. They appear, they start chasing you through the city. And really, it's kind of a downside, because we just talked about how fun driving was. And really, sometimes I wonder, what's the point of having the best supercars in the game if there's no one there to chase you? Not even the gang members, not even anyone. So there's a lot that's still needed. There's still a lot left to be desired, is all I can say, regarding the law enforcement system. Has it gotten better? Marginally. But yeah, that's what we're looking at. One of the other big changes was to the weather system in the game. Now, if you're looking at this, it looks very like acid stormy, like dust stormish. And this actually existed in the game beforehand. It just wasn't as prevalent as it is during this patch. If you play the game now, you'll actually notice the weather change a lot more than it ever used to, which I think is another great big benefit. The other big thing actually here is, surprisingly, when you shoot guns into the water, there is actually water caustics and water ripples that actually happen. The water does respond to being shot at. And if you think I'm going to be blown away by this feature, then let me tell you something, okay? There's a game called Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. You could walk around in the water and do the same goddamn thing. So, no, I'm not blown away by water refractions. This doesn't shock me. So, good attempt there, CD Projekt Red. Awesome. But beyond that, one thing that they updated was the actual NPC reaction. Now, if you hit a car, they'll actually try to route their way around you. And sometimes this doesn't work at all. For instance, once I hit a car with the Rayfield on the highway to Corpo Plaza, and it just indefinitely got stuck there. So I think the way that they're actually doing this is they have a pathway set into the world, and depending on which position the car is initially hit and stopping at, it may choose to quickly pick a route to go to. In some cases, I could flip the car 180, and it just decides to go in the opposite direction, the one where it was originally coming from. And, I think this is par for the course. It's about what you're going to expect. And I think a lot of these are rooted in the fact that they had to make these also work for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And when it comes to a lot of these adjustments and additions, this is where I think it's going to end, because any further addition and extension to the game's logic system will actually rely on the PC and will actually rely on PS5 and the Xbox Series systems for their higher performance output. The other thing that I have noticed, on the other hand, with this game is a little change to the rebalancing of the game's perk systems. So for instance, when you do download this patch, you do have to redistribute all of your perks. And I think it's because they actually have redistributed and buffed and debuffed a certain amount of things. There are better channels for discussing that aspect in this one, but I feel like it was a point worth actually stressing. Not something that changes the overall feel of the visual department, but something that is a restructure to the gameplay, okay? So hopefully, if you're somebody that did have an issue with your build being, nerfed or not nerfed or whatever, you might actually appreciate some of these rebalancings. And I just wanted to point that out. So when it comes to rebalancing a lot of the economy and the loot, for instance, now the game's actual various fixtures do in fact have a progression to them. So instead of giving you access to every side quest and gig right off the bat, you gotta do a few with them, level up your relation to each and every handler in different parts of the map, and then do more gigs as time progresses. There's an award at the end, but then the rebalancing is done in that aspect. When it comes to your character, one of the users on YouTube, known as One Dragon, who actually researches some of these patches and looks at the various differences, showcased that there are some buffs and some nerfs. For instance, in patch 1.31, they actually had critical damage that you would gain through skill progression at around 10% increases. And then in patch 1.5, that's been nerfed to 1%. So again, if you're playing the game and building a character, you might want to recheck and look at how things have been nerfed or buffed in certain capacities. Now, this is where I think the ending, and really the thesis for this video, was, has Cyberpunk been fixed? And in a lot of ways, I think what we're looking at is a framework for the future. Now, to understand, Cyberpunk has basically, in my opinion, been abandoned, okay? It's not going to be something that I feel is going to be heavily updated for the last generation system players, which I think is really bad considering the fact that this is the original console market that was catered to. But it's obvious CD Projekt Red made an incredibly ambitious game that just couldn't run on those systems, and I think every single platform holder had to pay that price. Now, personally, I understand from a developer point of view why they have to abandon PS4 and Xbox One, and why a lot of the future updates that are going to be really meaningful aren't going to backport over to those systems. But what about the systems that are already there? To be frank with you, patch 1.5 doesn't really add a whole lot of things that I feel complete Cyberpunk, or even puts it to its original, zenith. Now, listen, the No Man's Sky comparisons, when you start to see them floating all around, is this game going to get the same features that were shown during their initial E3 showing? And in a lot of cases, I don't think we're ever going to get that same crowd system. I don't think we're ever going to get a lot of those systems. And are we going to get things like a police system, an updated, police AI that chases you around, even gang AI that chases you around? Are we going to get these things in the game? And I feel, with the framework that they have set now, what CD Projekt Red is trying to do is basically create a version of the game that is stable, first and foremost, and then is able to be built upon as a platform for various new features, or features that really, frankly, should have been in the game to begin with. And I think that's fine. I think that's a cool way to go forward, especially if all those updates will be free, obviously, going forward, because when they initially advertised the game, those features should have been in the title. Now, I think it's pretty shady that they sold this game with all of these bugs to start off with, and obviously very, very deceptively hiding the fact that this game wasn't even complete in its launch phase. Is it better now? Is it playable now? I think the game, for what it's worth, is absolutely playable for somebody who wants a great single player, even if it's a linear single player experience, right off the bat. I think the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 arc work absolutely well. I think you're going to enjoy the story for what it is. But if you're going into this expecting a game that's going to redefine next generation or current generation open world trends, I think you're going to have to wait till Grand Theft Auto 6 or any other open world developer that actually does set the landmark to take that mantle instead. Because as of now, this game is a really nice version of Far Cry, okay? That's really all I can say. Running around the city, blowing shit up, killing a few things, nothing really so overly revolutionary. As far as this game calling itself an RPG again, I think it's a little questionable. I think we're going to need a lot more than just some new apartments and the ability to customize our character. I think for an RPG, we really have to focus on player choice, which, when we look at the narrative, there's not a whole heck of a lot of. The only way to fix that, and I think what's going to be really important for the next year or two for Cyberpunk and CD Projekt Red, is the expansion packs that are going to be coming out for this game. Now, CD Projekt Red has made some banger expansions for Witcher 3. There's no doubt about that. But what's most important is how they choose to handle Cyberpunk going forward. Now, there's a lot of lore they can tap into. There's a lot of stuff that they can do. There's a lot of extensions to the game map that they can add. And depending on how they choose to tackle that and how strong they choose to tackle it and what they choose to provide in terms of tangible game upgrades, and this will be the only chance they get to actually add new game mechanics and sort of add a storyline that is more in line than with what they showed in the open-ended E3 trailer, okay? This is the only way they're ever going to win it. The only hope is left in the expansion packs for the story. I don't think these expansions are going to come for the people that are on PlayStation 4 and base Xbox One, and that's sad to say. I think these expansion packs are only going to be for the current generation systems and the PC going forward. But for those who want that complete Cyberpunk experience, I think it's probably best waiting out until all the expansion packs and the patches are out for this game. But if you wanted to jump into Cyberpunk and you've been waiting like 2 years for it, this is a pretty good point to get in. The game is stable, the game is functional, and I absolutely think the story is worth getting into. Look, I wouldn't make these videos if I didn't have an interest in Cyberpunk 2077. I've waited for this game for so goddamn long that I think it's time to really just state for the record that I do in fact want this game to succeed. I want it to win, but I'm going to be 100% critical of this experience. I think I have to be, okay? What CD Projekt Red did during its showcase is deceptive, all right? When they specially released the game, and they knew what they were doing, but hopefully in the years to come, they can rectify this, and before they even drop other games like Witcher 4 or whatever else IP they're working on, they got to make this one an absolute banger and an absolute game to remember. Can Cyberpunk redeem itself? I absolutely believe so. It's a long way to get there, but I think patch 1.5 shows that at least they've pivoted in the right direction. There's not a whole lot here to blow your load over, but I think from a technical perspective, you can see that this game is a stable base to work off of. That said, though, I'm going to end this video off over here. I've said my closing thoughts, and let me know what you think in the comment section below. This is me, Mutahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.